Brazil is going through a huge transformation. It's in a state of flux. It's probably one of the most interesting places to study development nowadays. It's a democracy, but it's an imperfect democracy. Coming to Brazil, you will learn a lot about what it means to be in a society in flux that is still trying to find a path to development. And that's one of the most fascinating experiences you can have. Well, Brazil has a long story of autocratic governments and state capture by powerful elites that have managed to use the political system, game the political system, in order to gain privileges, in order to preserve privileges. This, of course, goes back a long way in our history, but surprisingly, it has persisted to a large extent even after Brazil became a democracy in the 1980s. The main challenge here is that income redistribution has been used for political purposes, and politicians from the left and from the right have historically used poverty and inequality as a way to gain support through clientelism and vote buying. And so, historically, most social policy in Brazil, as in other Latin American countries, have been designed to empower politicians to reward their supporters with public money and punish their opponents. That is what we call clientelism. There are many problems with Brazil's political system. It's what we call a coalition presidentialism. It combines a very fragmented legislature with a very powerful elected president in the US style. Very few countries adopt that system, and one of the reasons is that it's hard for a president to build coalitions in the legislature. It's hard for the president to manage such a fragmented legislature. And the way we do this in Brazil is through buying the support of members of parliament with the distribution of pork, patronage, and even opportunities for corruption. This is a very bad system. It relies on the fact that our electoral rules make Congress very unaccountable. It's very easy for someone to buy their way into Congress by getting support from special interest groups that have access to huge money. And so you set up a lavish political campaign and you get elected. And once you're there, you need the support of interest groups more than you need support from voters. And that kind of system makes our legislature very unaccountable and very ineffective. Public policy that is dependent on Congress in Brazil is very poorly designed. The best policies are the ones that are designed by the executive. This is a terrible system to have. No country should have all their social programs, all their public policy programs designed by the executive that is unchecked by a parliament. But the system is so perverse that the only places where you get effective public policy is where the executive somehow managed to keep Congress away and do it by themselves. The interesting thing in social policy in Brazil over the past 2 decades is that there's a new generation of programmatic social policies. Policies that are based on rules, not on political favoritism. This is the case of Bolsa Familia, Minha Casa Minha Vida, and many others. This is, to a large extent, a result of a more powerful presidency gaining the upper hand in social policy vis-a-vis the legislature. Our legislature, because of the way our political system is designed, our legislature is still very much a place dominated by traditional elites that rely on clientelism. But over the past few decades, presidents have been trying to force this legislature to relinquish control because they profit from it, they gain votes from it. And so by taking away this power, they give it back to the bureaucracy, the federal bureaucracy, and they have entrusted this bureaucracy with policies that are rules-based. This is the first time this happens in Brazil. Well, they have become a huge part because the politicians that benefited from it are now under fire for corruption. This is unrelated, right? They have benefited, they've created these programmatic social programs, and this is a good thing, but they've also been involved in massive corruption scandals. And so the right is now mobilizing, especially the middle classes and the upper classes, and they're pushing back against income redistribution, against the progress in income redistribution that has happened in Brazil over the past decades. One of the interesting things that we're seeing now in this election is the fall of the Brazilian establishment. The political elites that have dominated Brazilian politics since the end of the military dictatorship are now crumbling. They're now not able to continue to make the same promises all over again. And these sort of fairly moderate elites, but also very corrupt elites, they're crumbling because of the corruption scandals. People are fed up with so much corruption, and they know a lot about the mechanisms through which these elites have benefited from these agreements at the expense of the taxpayer. And so they are now willing to vote for extremists in the hopes that these extremists will somehow change the system. This is unlikely to happen, but the revolt against the system in Brazil is very much a result of decades of mismanagement and corruption in the country. Well, inequality in Brazil has started to go up again. We hadn't seen this for many years, and there is reason to believe that it will continue to go up. Brazil is going through a huge financial crisis, and the next president will not be able to resolve the problem. And so the state will not have the means to invest in social programs as it had before. And there's also a huge risk of the far right winning power in Brazil for the first time since the end of the military dictatorship. And if that happens, there is a risk of us going back in time and maybe losing much of the progress that has happened recently in Brazil. We need to change our electoral system. Our electoral system is very poorly designed. It has huge electoral districts that push the represented people and their representatives away from each other. Also, there needs to be a bigger focus on campaign finance reforms. It's very easy to raise money, and our campaigns are very expensive. We need to take money away from politics. And if we do these two things, that will contribute to making our legislature more accountable. And as a result, we'll have better public policies. It's unlikely that things will change. The problem is that the people who vote for change are the people who benefit from the current system. And so whenever we get change, it's because civil society puts pressure on politicians. And so we had that in 2013 when, after demonstrations, Congress was forced to sign in an anti-corruption law. This is the biggest example. All of the progress that has happened in the past few years happened despite the political class, not because of it. And so it's important to look at the role of civil society in creating pressure, in raising the costs of business as usual for the political class.